The morning light entered our living room slowly, without urgency, touching the couch before anything else. That was where I had placed the teddy bear the night before, upright, centered, intentional. Its small ribbon was still neatly tied, untouched. For a moment, I just stood there, holding my coffee, letting the stillness settle. Teddy Day had arrived quietly, the way the best days in our life usually did. I didn't expect anything extravagant. Teddy Day was never about scale or display. It was about reassurance, about knowing someone remembered softness, about choosing something gentle in a world that rarely slowed down. I believed in that completely. On the kitchen counter, a small bag of chocolates waited beside my keys. Nothing fancy, just a familiar brand, something he knew I liked. I nudged the bag slightly, not out of perfectionism, but habit. The same way I straightened picture frames or folded notes carefully. Small rituals had become my language of care. They grounded me. They made love feel present, tangible. Our home carried that rhythm. Morning coffee and matching mugs, a quick update on schedules, casual mentions of money that felt reassuring, not heavy. That morning, I noted that our joint savings had crossed $42,000, not with excitement, with calm. It meant stability. It meant we were doing something right. I also remembered his quarterly bonus had cleared the week before, $12,500, another quiet marker of progress, another reason I felt safe. I moved through the morning preparing without thinking too hard about it. The teddy bear, the chocolates, a folded note I slipped into an envelope, written in my natural handwriting, unpolished but honest. None of it felt performative, it felt natural, like an extension of who we had become together. When he stepped out of his home office, still carrying the residue of work calls, his smile was easy, familiar. He noticed the teddy bear immediately. "Happy Teddy Day," he said casually, like it didn't need emphasis. I smiled back without hesitation. "Happy Teddy Day." There was no pause, no awkwardness, no missing beat. And in that moment, I didn't analyze anything. I didn't need to. Trust doesn't ask for proof when it feels established. He handed me a single chocolate later, unwrapped, like a playful offering. I laughed softly, taking it from his hand. The gesture mattered more than the chocolate itself. It told me he had noticed, that he was present, that this day existed for both of us. We spent the afternoon in parallel motion. He worked, I handled a few errands. The teddy bear stayed on the couch, visible from almost every angle of the room. I liked that. It felt symbolic without being loud, a reminder of gentleness, of affection that didn't need explanation. At some point, I caught him scrolling on his phone. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. Just another normal moment in a day full of them. I didn't look twice. There was no reason to. Our life had settled into predictability, and predictability felt like trust. We knew each other's routines. We didn't question small delays or quiet moments. Love, I believed, didn't require constant verification. It required consistency. As the afternoon lights softened, I rearranged the dining table slightly, placing the envelope where he would notice it later. I didn't overthink the words inside. They weren't dramatic, just sincere. I believed sincerity lasted longer than intensity. That belief had carried me far. We talked over dinner about ordinary things, work updates, a possible trip later in the year, bills that needed scheduling. None of it felt transactional. It felt like partnership, like shared responsibility, like adulthood done gently. At one point, he mentioned how fast the week had gone. I agreed. Time felt smooth lately, unrushed. And yet, somewhere between clearing the plates and turning off the kitchen light, a thought crossed my mind without urgency. I remember thinking how fragile perfect routines could be if one piece ever moved quietly out of place. The thought didn't scare me. It didn't alarm me. It passed as quickly as it came. I trusted him. I trusted us. But I also understood, in a way I couldn't yet explain, that moments like this deserved attention, not suspicion, just awareness. Later that night, the teddy bear cast a soft shadow on the wall as the lamp dimmed. The chocolates were still mostly untouched. The note had been opened, read, folded back carefully. He smiled when he looked at me, the kind of smile that said familiarity, not performance. Everything felt aligned. And that was the truth of Teddy Day for me. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was gentle, predictable, safe. I believed in the innocence of that day. I believed in the meaning I had placed inside it. I believed that love, when treated with care, protected itself. I had no reason to doubt anything. And that belief, quiet, complete, unguarded, is what made Teddy Day matter so much.
Teddy Day didn't end badly. That was the strange part. It didn't explode, it didn't collapse. It simply drifted past me, quietly, like a day that forgot what it was meant to be. By early afternoon, the house had returned to its usual rhythm. The teddy bear still sat where I'd placed it that morning, untouched, its soft paws angled toward the window as if it had been waiting for something too. The chocolates remained on the table, their neat alignment slowly losing purpose as the hours passed. I noticed these details without reacting to them. I cleaned the kitchen, I answered emails, I folded laundry with deliberate care. I told myself that love didn't always need performance, that being married meant understanding silence, that not every expectation had to be met perfectly to still matter. He said he'd be home by 6. 6 came and went, gently, without announcement. At 6:30, the light outside softened into that pale gold that always made our living room feel warmer than it was. I turned on a lamp. At 7, I reheated dinner and left it on the stove. At 7:30, I stopped checking the time. There was no anger in me, only a growing stillness. When his message finally arrived, it was brief, casual, almost affectionate. Running late, client dinner ran long, don't wait up. I read it once, then again. The words felt ordinary enough, believable even. His job came with unpredictable hours, late meetings, set-in obligations. This explanation fit neatly into the life we had built, the kind of life that didn't require questioning. So I didn't question it. Instead, I replied with something equally light, a small reassurance, no punctuation that suggested disappointment. I placed my phone face down and poured myself a glass of water. It wasn't the delay that unsettled me. It was how easily I accepted it. Later that evening, I scrolled absently while sitting on the couch. The television played something forgettable. The teddy bear remained in my peripheral vision, a quiet reminder of intentions that had gone unacknowledged. Then I saw it, a tagged photo, not sent to me, not meant for me. It appeared between updates from friends and sponsored content, unremarkable in placement, unmistakable in impact. A softly lit restaurant, a polished wooden table, 2 glasses near the center of the frame, a small plush bear sat near the edge of the table, angled toward the camera. The caption was light, innocent, almost joking, Teddy Day done right. There was no name mentioned, no direct explanation, just a timestamp that aligned too neatly with the hours I had spent waiting. I didn't feel shock. I didn't feel panic. What I felt was something quieter, heavier, like a door closing somewhere deep inside me. I studied the image carefully, the angle, the lighting, the placement of the bear. It wasn't random. Someone had chosen it. Someone had thought about how it would look, how it would be perceived. I noticed the details because that was how my mind worked. I had always been attentive, observant. In our marriage, I was the one who remembered dates, noticed patterns, kept track of routines. That habit didn't disappear just because something felt uncomfortable. I didn't comment. I didn't call. I didn't ask who she was. I closed the app and placed my phone back on the table, face down again, as if giving it space might keep the moment contained. He came home just after 10. His voice sounded normal when he greeted me, tired but relaxed. He kissed my cheek without hesitation. There was nothing in his behavior that suggested guilt or urgency. He didn't rush to explain himself. He didn't mention Teddy Day at all. And I didn't bring it up. We talked about ordinary things, traffic, work, a project he'd been assigned. I listened the way I always did, attentively, calmly, while something inside me adjusted, quietly recalibrating. That night, lying in bed beside him, I stared at the ceiling and replayed the day without embellishment. No assumptions, no accusations, just facts. He had been absent, there had been an explanation, there had been a photo. None of these things on their own proved anything, but together they formed a shape I couldn't ignore, not because it was loud, but because it was precise. I didn't cry. Crying would have required certainty, and I wasn't there yet. What I felt was something subtle, shifting in how I held myself, a tightening of boundaries I hadn't realized were loose, a quiet return to self-respect that didn't announce itself but settled firmly into place. This wasn't about jealousy, it wasn't about competition, it was about alignment. The next few days passed without incident. Our routines continued: morning coffee, shared meals, casual conversations. On the surface, nothing had changed, but I had. I began noticing the timing of things, how often his meetings extended into evenings, how quickly his phone was turned face down now, how certain names appeared more frequently in passing stories, without context or detail. I didn't search his phone. I didn't follow him. I didn't confront him with what I had seen, because something in me understood instinctively that this moment required patience, not reaction. Teddy Day had always symbolized comfort to me, innocence, a soft promise of care that didn't demand anything in return. That was why the image unsettled me so deeply, not because it was proof of betrayal, but because it reframed something gentle into something strategic, and I needed to know which one it truly was. By the end of that week, I had stopped expecting explanations, not because I had lost interest, but because expectation without clarity felt like self-betrayal. I moved through my days with composure. I smiled when appropriate. I responded when spoken to. But inside, I was no longer reaching for reassurance. I was observing, quietly, carefully, because this was no longer about love. It was about truth. And I had learned, slowly and without bitterness, that truth doesn't reveal itself to those who rush toward it. It shows itself to those who stay still enough to see patterns form. Teddy Day had passed, but its meaning was no longer what I had believed it to be. And that understanding, calm, controlled, and entirely my own, marked the beginning of something far more important than disappointment. It marked the moment I stopped waiting. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to investigate my marriage. That part matters. Nothing dramatic happened overnight. No slammed doors, no accusations, no raised voices. What changed was quieter than that. It was a shift in how I noticed things. After Teddy Day passed, the house returned to its normal rhythm. Coffee brewed at the same time, shoes were left by the door the same way. His schedule sounded familiar when he explained it. On the surface, nothing had collapsed, but I had stopped filling in the blanks for him. I began paying attention to timing instead of tone, to patterns instead of promises. It wasn't suspicion, it was awareness, the kind that arrives when belief steps back and observation takes its place. The teddy bear stayed on the sofa for a few days longer than it should have, not because I was sentimental, but because I wanted to see how long it would take before he noticed. He didn't. It blended into the background, just like so many things I had quietly maintained. That was the first realization. Some absences only hurt when you stop compensating for them. The financial app on my phone had always been something I glanced out casually. We were comfortable, organized, responsible. I trusted that part of our life because it had never given me a reason not to. So when I noticed another small transfer midweek, it didn't alarm me immediately. The amount wasn't outrageous, just under $10,000, labeled vaguely, the kind of transaction that could easily be explained away by business expenses or short-term planning. I didn't ask him about it. Instead, I looked back. The previous month showed a similar movement, a little higher, a little quieter, always midweek, always routed the same way. I still didn't feel anger. What I felt was distance, emotional distance from my own assumptions. I began mapping time the way I used to map feelings. His late evenings lined up with those transfers more often than coincidence should allow. Client dinners that stretched longer than expected, meetings that required discretion, conversations that ended just a little too smoothly. The strange thing was how calm I felt while noticing all of this. Love had trained me to overlook inconsistencies. Awareness taught me to catalog them. I stopped reacting internally. No rehearsed explanations, no imagined confrontations. I let the information stand on its own. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I opened the calendar we shared, not because I suspected infidelity, but because I wanted clarity. There were gaps where commitments should have been, repeating blocks of time that never quite aligned with the explanations I'd been given. The teddy bear was gone by then. I hadn't moved it consciously. It simply disappeared from my daily view, the way innocence does when it no longer fits the room. What surprised me most wasn't the realization itself. It was how quickly my language changed, even inside my own head. I stopped asking why. I started asking when. I stopped wondering how I felt. I started verifying what existed. That was the moment I understood something important. This was no longer about love. It was about truth. And truth doesn't need emotion to stand upright. The chocolates from Teddy Day sat unopened in the pantry. I noticed their expiration date while reaching for something else. It felt symbolic in a way. That didn't hurt, just clarified. Some things are meant to be sweets only if shared honestly. The numbers continued to appear, not recklessly, carefully, almost respectfully, as if whoever moved them believed discretion equaled invisibility. I began documenting without drama, screenshots, dates, notes to myself written plainly, without judgment, no emotional language, no conclusions yet, just sequence. Sequence tells stories people never intend to share. Each amount was reasonable on its own. Together, they formed a rhythm, a quiet one that assumed I would remain focused on gestures instead of structure, and for a long time I had. Teddy Day had taught me something I hadn't realized until now. I had been measuring love through softness, through symbols, routines, shared anticipation. But trust, real trust, is sustained through transparency, through alignment, through timelines that don't require interpretation. I still spoke to him kindly, still listened, still nodded when things sounded familiar. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't hurt anymore. I was steady. And steadiness has a way of revealing what chaos tries to hide. One evening, as we sat together without much conversation, I noticed how peaceful the silence felt. Not tense, not loaded, just clear. That was new. Silence had stopped being something I filled. That's when I knew awareness had fully replaced hope. I didn't feel the urge to confront him. There was nothing to gain from questions I already had answers to. I wasn't preparing an argument. I was preparing accuracy. And accuracy doesn't rush. It waits. By the time I stopped asking myself why, the questions themselves had already lost relevance. Nothing around me looked disrupted. The house followed the same rhythm. Morning light still crossed the living room the same way it always had. The teddy bear from Teddy Day remained on the couch, its stitched expression unchanged, its presence almost observant. But internally, something fundamental had shifted. I no longer stood inside my emotions. I stood beside them. What I learned in that phase was simple but decisive. Emotion reacts, structure responds, and I was done reacting. I didn't confront him. I didn't test his honesty. I didn't search for reassurance. Instead, I began organizing my reality. It started quietly, without ceremony. A notebook at first, dates written cleanly, without commentary. Transfers that once felt isolated began to form sequences when placed next to one another. Midweek movements, repeated timing, adjusted amounts. Never identical, always deliberate. Patterns don't reveal themselves when you demand answers. They appear when you stop interrupting them. I printed statements and laid them out across the table, month beside month, deposit beside withdrawal. I stopped reading them emotionally and began reading them structurally. What surprised me wasn't that money had moved, it was how carefully it had been done. This wasn't impulsive behavior. This was managed behavior. And managed behavior leaves documentation. I created folders on my laptop with neutral labels. No dramatic names, no assumptions, just facts, screenshots, PDFs, monthly reconciliations. I stored copies in places that didn't share access, not out of fear, out of precision.
Quietly, I separated income streams. Silently, I redirected deposits. Deliberately, I removed shared assumptions from my financial life. None of these steps required permission. They required clarity. Authority doesn't arrive with confrontation. It arrives with preparation, patience, and paper. The first professional conversation felt unexpectedly calm. I wasn't there to tell a story. I was there to confirm a structure. I placed timelines on the table instead of explanations, numbers instead of emotions. No one asked how betrayed I felt. They asked how long the pattern extended, how frequently it repeated, how consistently it avoided attention. Those were questions I could answer without hesitation. For the first time, I wasn't processing information, I was presenting it. That distinction shifted the entire dynamic. What followed wasn't dramatic, it was methodical. Clarification replaced speculation, documentation replaced doubt, possibility narrowed into certainty. I noticed something subtle during that phase. My body felt quieter. My breathing slowed. The internal noise that had once followed every unanswered question faded. That calm wasn't relief. It was alignment. Back at home, I didn't announce the changes I was making. I let outcomes speak instead, as access shifted and expectations quietly adjusted. Silence wasn't avoidance. Silence was containment. The teddy bear stayed exactly where it was. I didn't move it. It no longer symbolized innocence. It symbolized contrast, the difference between appearance and operation. As figures accumulated, the totals crossed beyond what I'd initially calculated, enough to remove uncertainty, enough to demand resolution. The scale wasn't shocking, it was clarifying. Preparation became my language. I documented every step, not to confront, not to punish, but to ensure control. Once something is documented, it stops being personal. It becomes procedural. Procedure doesn't argue, it doesn't explain, it simply holds. What surprised me most was how unnecessary confrontation suddenly felt. There was nothing to gain from volume. Truth doesn't need emphasis when it has structure. Each organized page reduced emotional weight. Each verified figure returned a sense of proportion. I wasn't gaining power over someone else, I was reclaiming coherence over my own life. For the first time in months, my internal pace matched my external reality. I wasn't ahead emotionally, I was ahead administratively. That distinction mattered more than I expected, because once authority is established quietly, it doesn't announce itself, it waits. And waiting, when supported by preparation, isn't passive, it's decisive. The house did not change after everything settled. The walls stayed the same color. The light still entered through the same windows each morning. The couch remained in its place. The teddy bear, quietly overlooked for weeks, was still there. But I had changed. Not in a way that announced itself loudly, not in a way that demanded recognition. The change was internal, deliberate, and permanent. By the time the paperwork was complete, I had already mourned what needed to be mourned. There was no need for arguments, no need for explanations, no need for apologies that would arrive too late to matter. The outcome did not surprise me. It felt earned. The accounts were separated cleanly, methodically, no accusations attached to them, just structure, balance, and clarity. My income redirected into a new account under my name, automatic transfers adjusted, future obligations recalculated. The numbers aligned again. This time, honestly. I noticed how different it felt to look at my finances without second-guessing where something might disappear. There was peace in knowing that what I earned stayed where it belonged. There was strength in seeing my name stand alone, unshared, unquestioned. I did not feel victorious. I felt stable. Stability has a quiet sound. It does not announce itself. It does not demand applause. It simply stays. The lawyer closed the file without ceremony, no dramatic conclusion, no raised voices, just a final confirmation that everything had been handled properly, legally, and completely. When I walked out of that office, the air felt lighter, not because something had ended, but because something false no longer had access to me. At home, the evenings became predictable again. Predictability, I learned, is not boring when it is honest. It is comforting.
I returned to small routines, cooking without rushing, folding laundry without distraction, drinking coffee without watching the clock or the phone. The silence no longer felt heavy. It felt intentional. One evening, I noticed the teddy bear again. It was still seated on the couch, its bow slightly crooked from where I had adjusted it weeks ago. For a moment, I considered moving it, packing it away, giving it away. Instead, I sat down across from it. Teddy Day had arrived with innocence, with hope, with the belief that love, when treated gently, would protect itself. That belief wasn't foolish, it was human. The day itself had never lied to me. The symbol had never betrayed me, only the person who misunderstood what innocence required. I realized then that I did not resent that version of myself, the woman who prepared chocolates, who arranged a simple gift, who believed in alignment. She was not weak, she was open. And openness, when guided by self-respect, becomes wisdom, not regret. I didn't rewrite the past, I reframed it. Teddy Day no longer represented expectation, it represented awareness. It reminded me that love does not need secrecy to survive, that commitment does not require hidden timelines, that innocence is not proven by words, but by consistency. The next morning, I placed the teddy bear back where it had been, not as a reminder of what was lost, but of what I now understood. Some symbols do not need to be discarded. They need to be redefined. My life moved forward without drama, without announcements, without explanations owed to anyone but myself. Friends noticed the change before I spoke about it. They said I seemed calmer, more grounded, more certain. They were right. I had reclaimed something quieter than happiness. I had reclaimed authority over my own life. There were no final conversations worth replaying, no closure scenes worth dramatizing. The truth had already done its work. And when the next Valentine's week arrived, I didn't prepare for it. I didn't avoid it either. I simply let it pass, uncharged, unweighted, neutral. Because love days no longer defined me. Clarity did. And if Teddy Day once stood for innocence shared, now it stands for something stronger. The moment I learned that dignity doesn't ask questions, it answers them.